3 days after a gunman nearly turned the White House Correspondents' Dinner into a crime scene, the President of the United States hosted the King of England for a state dinner at a 400 million ballroom that doesn't exist yet. That sentence contains no exaggeration. Donald Trump demolished the East Wing of the White House to build a ballroom. It costs 400 million. It is not finished. Construction was paused. And so, on April 28, 2026, King Charles III arrived at the White House and delivered the following line, with a straight face, to the man who owns the rubble. I cannot help noticing the readjustments to the East Wing, Mr. President. I'm sorry to say that we British, of course, made our own small attempt at real estate redevelopment of the White House in 1814. In 1814, British troops burned the White House to the ground. King Charles just compared Donald Trump's vanity ballroom to a war crime at Trump's dinner table, in Trump's house, to Trump's face. And the room laughed, and Trump laughed. And Charles smiled the specific smile of a man who has been rehearsing that line since the plane left Heathrow. Cartman stared at the screen and said, "Dude, that's royally ice cold." The question this video answers is not whether Charles was joking. The question is what it means when the only person in Washington willing to say what everyone is thinking is a 76-year-old British monarch whose country this administration has been threatening with tariffs for 6 months. Here's what happened, in the correct order. On Saturday, April 25th, the White House Correspondents' Dinner ended in chaos when Cole Thomas Allen, 31, of Torrance, California, charged through a security checkpoint at the Washington Hilton armed with a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives. He was tackled. One Secret Service officer took a bullet to his vest and survived. The president was evacuated. It was the third apparent assassination attempt on Donald Trump since 2024. 3 days later, King Charles III and Queen Camilla landed in Washington as planned. Buckingham Palace announced the visit would proceed with minor operational adjustments. The King of England was coming. There had just been an assassination attempt, and the schedule held. Charles arrived at the White House on April 28th. Trump welcomed him on the South Lawn, praised the eternal bond between the two nations, and called Charles direct, quote, cute. The King of England. Cute. Earlier that day, Charles had addressed a joint session of Congress, only the second British monarch ever to do so. The first was his mother. He praised NATO. He emphasized that America's influence carries, in his words, weight and meaning. He reminded the room that some things built slowly over centuries are worth preserving. These were not controversial statements on their face. They were, however, in direct tension with the current administration's positions on NATO, allied governments, and the general usefulness of partners who ask questions. Nobody in the chamber said that out loud. Charles said it, they applauded, and everyone went to get dressed for dinner. The state dinner guest list was its own statement. All 6 conservative Supreme Court justices attended. The 3 liberal justices were not on the list. Fox News CEO Suzanne Scott was there alongside Bret Baier, Maria Bartiromo, Ainsley Earhart, Greg Gutfeld, Laura Ingraham, and Jesse Waters. 4 courses, Dover sole, a chocolate gâteau shaped like a beehive, 3 American wines. Then Charles stood up and told the room that the British burned the building they were sitting in the context of a $400 million construction project that currently exists as a hole in the ground. He also told Trump directly that Trump had recently said if not for the United States, European countries would be speaking German. Charles replied, "Dare I say that, if it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking French." He called the evening a very considerable improvement on the Boston Tea Party. 3 jokes. Each one landed. Each one said something true. Then everyone had dessert. Here is what makes this more than a highlight reel. Donald Trump has spent significant energy making it clear to allied governments that the old rules no longer apply. Tariffs threatened and applied. NATO allies lectured. Heads of government dressed down on camera in the Oval Office. The message has been consistent. This administration does not feel obligated to be polite about what it wants. And then Charles flew in and made 3 jokes about it. At the table, in the house, in the building his ancestors burned down. The jokes were not accidental. Charles does not do accidental. He has given thousands of speeches. He is surrounded at all times by advisors whose entire function is to manage the geopolitical weight of every word he says. The French line was prepared. The 1814 line was prepared. The Boston Tea Party line was prepared. These were deliberate choices, approved at the level of the crown, delivered with perfect timing to a room that could not quite believe what it was hearing. What Charles was actually doing was precise. He was making the point that the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom is old enough to contain the 1814 burning, the Tea Party, 2 world wars, and a ballroom dispute, and still survive. That is the diplomatic message inside the punchline. We have been through worse than this. We are still here. So are you. So let us be adults. It is the most elegant way anyone has told this administration to get over itself. And it worked because it was wrapped in comedy. You cannot be angry at someone for making you laugh. Trump laughed. The room laughed. Charles smiled. The point was made on camera, in front of Fox News hosts and 6 Supreme Court justices, and nobody could object without objecting to a joke, which would have been worse. Kyle, watching the footage back, just said, "That's the most passive-aggressive thing I've ever seen, and I grew up with Cartman." The ballroom itself deserves attention. Trump demolished the East Wing, standing since 1942, to build a 50,000 square foot ballroom at a cost of $400 million. Historic preservationists sued. Construction was paused. The administration had even pressured the National Trust for Historic Preservation to drop the case, citing the Correspondents' Dinner shooting as proof the White House needed its own secure venue. So the argument for the ballroom had become, in part, we need it because someone nearly shot the president at the hotel. Charles looked at the rubble, thought of his ancestors and their torches, and made it a punchline. The reaction split exactly as you would expect. Trump supporters treated the visit as a triumph. The king came. He praised the relationship. He gave Trump a bell from a British Navy submarine. The jokes were acknowledged and absorbed in about 45 seconds. The message from that corner: this is what winning looks like. Allies respect us again. The opposition treated Charles as a hero for approximately 36 hours. The French line clip was shared with the energy of people who had been waiting their entire lives for a monarch to say it. This mostly missed the point. Charles was not trying to dunk on Trump. He was trying to maintain a relationship while making a few things clear. Mistaking careful diplomacy for a political endorsement is a very American thing to do. Internationally, the coverage was more analytical. The British press was quietly proud. European governments were genuinely heartened because Charles's Congress speech said things Allied governments have wanted said in Washington for months and could not say themselves without consequences. Having the King of England deliver those points to bipartisan applause inside a compliment was a diplomatic maneuver nobody quite expected. Ordinary people watched the 1814 clip, laughed, showed someone nearby, and moved on, which is probably the right response. It was funny. It was true. The building was right there. Here is what this moment actually reveals, and it is not really about Charles. Washington has become a place where basic statecraft, showing up prepared, pressing a point without making it a confrontation, leaving everyone feeling like the relationship is intact, registers as extraordinary. Charles did nothing heads of state have not been doing for centuries. He was charming. He acknowledged his host's loss, his host's achievements, and his host's construction project, then made 3 jokes that said something true and sat down. That is unremarkable in historical terms. The fact that it lands as remarkable in April 2026 tells you something about the baseline. The people who were supposed to say something about the East Wing did not. The justices were at dinner eating Dover sole. The Fox News hosts were there. Congress applauded the king's speech and went home. The ballroom is still a hole in the ground, and nobody with authority to change that changed it. That is the pattern. The thing that should be said does not get said by the people positioned to say it. It gets said, if at all, by someone with nothing to lose. A king, a pope, a foreign correspondent writing from a safe distance. The people inside the system with the gavels and the votes and the camera, they laugh when someone else says it and go back to what they were doing. This is not a partisan observation. Proximity to power does this regardless of which party holds it. The closer you are, the less you can afford. Charles could say it because he is leaving Thursday. He is going back to London. He does not need anything from this administration that he cannot wait out. That is currently the only position in Washington from which the honest observation can be delivered. Here is where we land. King Charles III flew to Washington 3 days after an assassination attempt, addressed Congress, ate a beehive-shaped chocolate dessert, and told the President of the United States to his face that the dinner was an improvement on the Boston Tea Party, that without the British he would be speaking French, and that the construction site where the East Wing used to be reminded him of something his ancestors once did with torches. Trump laughed. The room laughed. Everyone went home. The hole in the ground is still there this morning. The most effective political observation made in Washington this week was delivered by a constitutional monarch with cancer, who is not running for anything, does not live here, and was gone by Thursday. He said, with 3 jokes and impeccable timing, what the room had been refusing to say to itself. And it worked, because he had the one thing most people in that building no longer have. He could afford to be honest. The ballroom is still not built. The East Wing is still gone. The special relationship is intact. The jokes were excellent. A king came to Washington, said the thing, got a standing ovation, and flew home. And Washington called it a lovely evening and got back to work.